Dear friends, subscribe and hit the bell. Your support allows us to continue our investigations. The name of Vladimir Oskarovich Kappel echoes from a tragic era when Russia split into two irreconcilable camps. In the whirlwind of the Civil War, this man became not just a military leader. He transformed into a symbol, a living legend of the White Movement. His image, as if forged from steel and the ice of Siberian expanses, still evokes awe and admiration, regardless of political views. A hereditary officer, a brilliant strategist, a man of unyielding will, Kappel embodied those qualities of the Russian officer corps that for centuries formed the military elite of the empire. But fate had prepared for him trials beyond ordinary human comprehension. The psychological attacks of his troops, when officers advanced on machine guns standing tall, became military classics. And his final feat, the Great Siberian Ice March, turned into an epic saga of spiritual resilience. Dying from gangrene, he refused to abandon his soldiers, preferring to share with them all the hardships of the retreat through the snow-covered expanses of Siberia. Kappel's story is the story of a man whose loyalty to his oath and duty proved stronger than the fear of death. Vladimir Oskarovich Kappel was born into a family of Swedish descent who had long settled in Russia and dedicated themselves to serving their new homeland. His father, Oskar Pavlovich, was an officer in the Russian army, which largely predetermined his son's life path. Born on April 16, 1883, in St. Petersburg, young Vladimir absorbed military traditions and the values of officer honor from childhood. His mother, Sofia Fyodorovna, came from the noble family of Postelnikovs, which provided the boy with a proper home education. In the Kappel household, education, discipline, and a sense of duty were valued, qualities that would later become defining in the character of the future general. A military career for Vladimir was predetermined by family tradition. After graduating from the 2nd Cadet Corps, he entered the Nikolaevsky Cavalry School, one of the most prestigious military educational institutions of the Russian Empire. Here, young Kappel proved himself to be a determined and talented youth, demonstrating not only excellent academic abilities, but also outstanding leadership qualities. He graduated from the school with first-class honors, which opened up broad prospects for him. The young officer's service began in the Tver Dragoon Regiment, where he quickly earned the respect of both commanders and subordinates. However, the ambitious Kappel aspired to more. Understanding that a serious military career required specialized education, he entered the Nikolaev Academy of the General Staff. His studies were not easy. The competition was extremely high, and the requirements for General Staff officers surpassed ordinary army standards. Nevertheless, Vladimir Oskarovich brilliantly graduated from the academy in 1913, receiving the rank of captain. On the eve of World War I, Kappel served on the staff of the Kazan Military District. When the war broke out, he was transferred to the Southwestern Front, where his outstanding abilities as a military strategist and tactician became apparent. For developing and successfully conducting several operations, Kappel was awarded the Orders of St. Anne and St. Stanislaus. Officers noted his astonishing composure in critical situations and his ability to find unconventional solutions in complex combat environments. 1917 became a point of no return for millions of Russians, and Vladimir Kappel was no exception. The February Revolution found him in Petrograd, where he served in the main directorate of the General Staff. Like many officers, Kappel viewed the fall of the monarchy with caution, but without open protest. The provisional government, which maintained its adherence to the idea of continuing the war until a victorious end, did not contradict his understanding of duty to the fatherland. Everything changed in October. The Bolshevik coup and the subsequent chaos in the army caused Kappel deep revulsion. He was particularly outraged by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and the collapse of the front. For a hereditary officer raised on the ideals of serving Russia, such an agreement with the enemy looked like national betrayal. Initially, Kappel tried to stay out of political struggle. He went to Samara, where his family lived, his wife Olga Sergeyevna and 2 children. Here, away from the turmoil of the capital, he hoped to weather the turbulent times. However, events developed rapidly, and soon neutrality became impossible. The decisive moment came in May-June 1918, when the uprising of the Czechoslovak Corps broke out in the Volga region. The Czechs, former prisoners of war of the Austro-Hungarian army, sought to reach the Western Front via Siberia and the Far East. Clashes with the Bolsheviks escalated into a full-scale conflict that quickly spread along the Trans-Siberian Railway. In Samara, power passed to the Committee of Members of the Constituent Assembly, Komuch. This organization, consisting mainly of socialist revolutionaries, announced the creation of a people's army to fight the Bolsheviks. Kappel faced a choice: join the anti-Bolshevik forces or remain aloof. For a man of his character and upbringing, the decision was predetermined. Despite the fact that the political views of the socialist revolutionaries were far from the monarchical convictions of an old-school officer, Kappel saw them as the lesser evil compared to Bolshevism. On June 8, 1918, he appeared at the headquarters of the People's Army and offered his services. Chief of Staff Colonel Galkin, appreciating Kappel's experience and qualifications, immediately entrusted him with the formation of a volunteer detachment. The task seemed almost impossible. There were no resources, and most of the population took a wait-and-see attitude. However, Kappel's organizational talent manifested itself fully. In just a few days, he managed to gather a detachment of 300 volunteers, officers, students, gymnasium students. In the summer of 1918, Vladimir Kappel's name began to acquire legendary status. His first detachment, formed literally from nothing, showed astonishing effectiveness. The Kappelevtsi, as they came to be called, differed from other white formations in their special fighting spirit and discipline. At the heart of this phenomenon lay their leader's unique command style. Kappel did not create an army according to the templates of Tsarist Russia. He intuitively understood that in the conditions of civil confrontation, different approaches were required. The core of his detachments consisted of volunteers, people who consciously chose their side in the conflict. Among them, officers, cadets, students, and gymnasium students predominated. Educated strata of society for whom the idea of preserving Russia held deep meaning. A distinctive feature of the Kappelevtsi was their astonishing cohesion. The commander personally knew many of his fighters, remembered their names, and was interested in their lives. He never demanded from his subordinates what he could not do himself. In battles, he was always on the front line, sharing all dangers and hardships with the soldiers. This manner of command sharply contrasted with the habits of some other white generals who preferred to lead from the rear. The Kappelevtsi's first military operations astonished their contemporaries. On June 19, 1918, a detachment of only 300 men attacked Bezenchuk Station, where a well-armed Bolshevik garrison was located. It seemed that such a disparity in forces doomed the offensive to failure, but Kappel applied the tactics of a lightning strike. His fighters acted so decisively and cohesively that the enemy was defeated and fled, leaving behind rich spoils. This success had immense psychological significance. It showed that Bolsheviks could be defeated even with smaller forces if one acted boldly and unconventionally. New volunteers flocked to Kappel's detachment, its numbers quickly growing. By early July, Vladimir Oskarovich commanded about 1,000 men, and by August, several thousand. Kappel paid particular attention to ideological work. Unlike many white commanders, he did not rely exclusively on monarchical ideas. The main unifying principle for the Kappelevtsi was the struggle for a united and indivisible Russia. Its liberation from Bolshevism, which they considered a phenomenon alien to the Russian national spirit. This broad platform allowed him to attract people of various political views to his detachments, from monarchists to moderate socialists. The psychological attacks of Kappel's troops became a legend of the Civil War, a phenomenon that went far beyond the scope of an ordinary tactical maneuver. What exactly were these famous attacks that struck terror into the Red Army soldiers and inspired the White Guards? In the classical sense, a Kappel-style psychological attack was an advance in full formation, often in dress uniform, with unfurled banners and an orchestra. Officers marched ahead with bared sabers, demonstratively disregarding danger. Such a spectacle had a stunning effect on the enemy, especially on inexperienced fighters. However, military historians note that Kappel did not invent the psychological attack as a separate tactical maneuver. He masterfully used the psychological factor as a component of a general offensive. Kappel's attacks were always carefully prepared. Before the advance in chains, artillery preparation was carried out, and flank attacks and encirclements were organized. Psychological pressure was merely an element of a complex combat plan. The effectiveness of such attacks proved surprisingly high. Many Red Army units, seeing officers advancing in full height, simply abandoned their positions and retreated. The fact is that in the ranks of the Red Army in 1918, hastily mobilized peasants and workers with minimal military training predominated. For them, the sight of a confidently advancing enemy, not hiding from bullets, created the impression of his absolute superiority and invulnerability. It is interesting that Kappel himself never called his tactics a psychological attack. This term was born later in Soviet literature and cinema. The most vivid embodiment of the image of a white psychological attack can be seen in the film Chapayev, where Kappel's men are depicted as mechanically marching officers in black uniforms advancing to the beat of drums directly into machine guns. This artistic interpretation is far from historical reality. Kappel's men did not wear black uniforms, and their attacks were not senseless suicide. Nevertheless, the Soviet cinematic image proved so powerful that it displaced historical truth from mass consciousness. In reality, Kappel's psychological attacks were a calculated risk. He understood that losses from such a method of attack could be higher, but he compensated for this with careful preparation and timing. Kappel never threw his men into senseless frontal attacks if the chances of success were minimal. The summer of 1918 became Vladimir Kappel's finest hour. The Volga campaign was a military operation that brought him fame as a brilliant tactician and strategist. It all began with Komuch's order to liberate Simbirsk and Kazan from the Bolsheviks. The task seemed impossible. The forces were unequal, and the enemy possessed artillery and armored trains. But Kappel believed in his plan. On July 21st, the detachment set out from Samara. Moving on steamboats along the Volga, Kappel's men suddenly landed near Simbirsk and with a swift strike drove the Reds out of the city. This victory held immense symbolic significance. Simbirsk was Lenin's birthplace, but the main goal remained Kazan, a major industrial center where a significant portion of Russia's gold reserve was stored. On August 6th, Kappel's men began their offensive on the city. Despite stubborn resistance, Kazan was taken a day later. The spoils were enormous. Over 500 million gold rubles, significant stockpiles of weapons and ammunition. The capture of the gold reserve became a turning point. Now the White Movement had a financial basis to continue the struggle. Kappel's name resounded throughout the Volga region, and thousands of volunteers flocked to him. It seemed that just a little more, and the path to Moscow would be open. However, the triumph was short-lived. The Bolshevik command, realizing the danger, transferred significant forces to the Volga front. Leon Trotsky personally arrived in the combat zone to organize a counter-offensive. The Red Army received reinforcements, artillery, and armored trains. In early September, a massive Red offensive on Kazan began. Kappel resisted desperately, but the forces were too unequal. On September 10th, his troops were forced to abandon the city. The retreat became a bitter ordeal for Kappel's men, who were accustomed to victories. The Volga campaign revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of Kappel's strategy. On the one hand, he showed brilliant results in offensive operations with limited resources. On the other hand, he could not hold the captured territories due to a lack of reserves and logistical support. This was a common problem for the White Movement, the ability to win tactical battles while strategically losing the campaign. In the autumn of 1918, the fate of the White Movement in eastern Russia took a sharp turn. After the fall of Kazan and the retreat from the Volga region, the Kappelevtsi, having preserved their morale and organizational structure, withdrew into Siberia. It was at this pivotal moment that Admiral Alexander Vasilyevich Kolchak entered the political arena, proclaimed supreme ruler of Russia in Omsk on November 18th. For Kappel, a new stage in his military career began. Kolchak, appreciating his talent and reputation, immediately singled out the energetic colonel among other commanders. In December 1918, Vladimir Oskarovich received the rank of Major General and soon after was appointed commander of the 1st Volga Group of Forces. This was not just a promotion, it was a recognition of his exceptional merits. Under Kolchak's banners, Kappel proved himself not only as a tactician, but also as a strategist. He was able to see the overall picture of the front, coordinate the actions of various units, and find weak points in the enemy's defense. His troops were distinguished by high mobility and the ability to deliver unexpected blows where they were not expected. In the spring of 1919, Kolchak's army launched a large-scale offensive to the west. The Kappelevtsi played a key role in this operation, breaking through the Red defenses in the most important sectors. For his successful actions, Vladimir Oskarovich was promoted to lieutenant general, the highest military rank he achieved in his career. However, the strategic situation gradually changed, not in favor of the Whites. The Red Army, reorganized by Trotsky, was building up its strength. In the summer of 1919, the Bolshevik counteroffensive began. Kappel, now commanding the 3rd Corps, did everything possible to stem the onslaught. But the disparity in forces was too great. At a critical moment, when many White units began to disintegrate, Kappel maintained iron discipline in his troops. This allowed him to conduct an organized retreat, saving not only people but also military equipment. Kolchak, seeing in him one of the few commanders capable of turning the tide, appointed Kappel commander of the Moscow Army Group in November 1919. This appointment was the supreme ruler's last hope. The name Moscow Group reflected not the actual state of affairs, but rather a dream, a desire to return to the heart of Russia. In fact, Kappel's troops were retreating further and further east, fighting rearguard actions. The phenomenon of Vladimir Kappel's command style lay in a remarkable combination of strict discipline and a humane attitude towards his subordinates. Unlike many white generals, he never maintained a distance between himself and the rank-and-file soldiers. Kappel could easily sit by a campfire with soldiers, listen to their problems, and share a meager ration. At the same time, his authority not only did not suffer, but, on the contrary, strengthened. Soldiers saw in him not just a commander, but a leader ready to share all the hardships of wartime. This leadership style created a special atmosphere of brotherhood in Kappel's units. Officers did not shout at soldiers, nor did they use corporal punishment, practices not uncommon in other units of the White Army. Instead, Kappel's men cultivated mutual respect and an understanding of the common goal. Vladimir Oskarovich knew how to approach people of different backgrounds and education. He spoke to peasants in simple, understandable language, without stooping to populism. With officers, he discussed the subtleties of military strategy, listening to their opinions. This ability to unite different social groups into a single whole was especially valuable in the conditions of the Civil War. Kappel's tactical thinking was distinguished by its unconventionality and flexibility. He was not constrained by the dogmas of military science, though he knew classical theory perfectly. Kappel understood that in conditions of maneuver warfare with limited resources, new approaches were required. He actively used raids into enemy rear, surprise attacks, and disinformation. Armored trains became an especially effective weapon in his hands. Mobile fortresses capable of quickly transferring firepower to threatened sections of the front. Unlike many white commanders, Kappel paid great attention to reconnaissance. He created an effective network of informants, which allowed him to make decisions based on accurate data about the enemy. Often, his detachments attacked the Reds precisely where they were not expected, inflicting maximum damage with minimal own losses. Another strong point of the general was his ability to inspire troops in the most difficult situations. When the situation seemed hopeless, Kappel found words that raised morale. He never lied to soldiers, never concealed difficulties, but always pointed the way to overcome them. In the most critical moments, he personally led troops into attack, setting an example of fearlessness. This personal example was more effective than any orders or appeals. Kappel possessed a rare quality: strategic vision. He understood that military victories were meaningless without political support from the population. Therefore, in the areas occupied by his troops, strict order was established, which excluded looting and violence against civilians. This sharply contrasted with the actions of some other white detachments and attracted the sympathy of the local population. Even during periods of retreat, Kappel's men maintained high morale and organization. This was especially noticeable in the winter of 1919-1920, when Kolchak's army was effectively disintegrating. Units under Kappel's command retreated in full order, maintaining combat capability and even delivering counterblows. The secret of this steadfastness lay not only in the commander's military talent, but also in the special atmosphere of trust he created in his troops. The autumn of 1919 brought severe trials to the White movement in eastern Russia. The Red Army, having received significant reinforcements, launched a decisive offensive along the entire front. Admiral Kolchak's troops, exhausted by previous battles and stretched across vast expanses, could not withstand this onslaught. What historians would later call, quote, "zero" began, the forced withdrawal of white armies deep into Siberia. For the Kappelevtsi, this was the first serious retreat in their entire combat history. Accustomed to victories and rapid forward marches, they now had to yield territory step by step. territory for which they had shed so much blood. Vladimir Oscarovich deeply grieved over every abandoned city, every village, but understood the inevitability of the retreat. Problems snowballed. Rear services could not cope with the evacuation of property and the wounded. Railways were overloaded. Retreating units often lost contact with each other. In these conditions, Kappel proved himself a master of organized retreat. His corps withdrew in complete order, maintaining combat formation and regularly delivering counterattacks against the pressing Red units. The moral factor became an especially severe trial. The retreat engendered apathy and despondency among the soldiers. Many began to question, what are they fighting for if they constantly have to retreat? Desertion, almost unheard of previously in Kappel's units, began to reach alarming proportions. Some officers fell into despair, seeing their units' numbers dwindle. In this critical situation, Kappel's special gift as a leader manifested itself. He personally toured the units, spoke with officers and soldiers, instilling confidence in them. "Retreat is not defeat," he would say. "It is a maneuver that will allow us to gather strength and return. Russia is vast, and the Bolsheviks will not be able to hold all of its territory." The army's material situation worsened daily. There was a shortage of literally everything, from ammunition to warm clothing. The Siberian winter was approaching, threatening to be more formidable than any enemy. Kappel demanded maximum resource mobilization from the rear services, but capabilities were limited. The economy of the territories controlled by the Whites was in a state of collapse. Inflation had reached catastrophic proportions. November 1919 marked the beginning of the most terrible ordeal for the Kappelovites. Red armies pressed Kolchak's troops along the entire front. Omsk, the capital of White Siberia, fell on November 14th. Kolchak and the government evacuated eastward along the Trans-Siberian Railway. The army retreated after them, turning into an endless convoy stretching for hundreds of kilometers. And then, nature seemed to decide to finish off the retreating. Unprecedented frosts struck. Thermometers showed 40 degrees below zero, and sometimes the column dropped to 50. Thus began the Great Siberian Ice March. In these inhuman conditions, Kappel took command of the remnants of Kolchak's armies. The task seemed impossible, to save what could still be saved. Under his command were about 30,000 fighters, many civilian refugees, convoys with wounded and officers' families. This army was doomed to slow movement across frozen Siberia, in conditions where every hour of delay could cost hundreds of lives. The Reds pursued the retreating, striving to cut off their path to the east. The railway, this salvific steel path, was often cut by partisans. They had to move around, through the snow-covered taiga, making their way through snowdrifts. Horses fell from exhaustion, people froze in their sleep. Kappel understood that in such conditions, only his personal example could prevent the army from final collapse. He refused the privileges of a commander. He rode on horseback or walked with everyone, slept by the same campfires, ate the same meager rations. When one of the staff officers suggested he use a sleigh with a warm carriage, Kappel sharply replied, "This act instantly spread through the columns," further strengthening the general's authority among the exhausted fighters. River crossings were particularly difficult. Bridges were often blown up by Reds or partisans, and they had to find detours or cross on ice. But Siberian rivers are treacherous. Under the snow, holes and thin ice often hid. They had to move by feel, losing precious time and risking falling into the icy water. In these conditions, Kappel showed amazing composure and endurance. He personally led the most difficult crossings, always being in the most dangerous sections. His calmness was transmitted to those around him, making them believe in the possibility of salvation even in the most hopeless situations. The retreating army was pursued not only by Red troops, but also by local partisan detachments formed from peasants dissatisfied with requisitions and mobilizations by Kolchak's authorities. They set ambushes, attacked convoys, and cut off isolated units from the main forces. Kappel was forced to allocate significant forces to guard the flanks and rear, which further slowed down the movement. But even in these conditions, he did not lose strategic thinking. Understanding that passive retreat would lead to the final demoralization of the troops, Kappel organized sudden counterattacks against the pursuing Red units. These short but decisive attacks not only held back the enemy, but also raised the spirits of the White troops, proving that they were still capable of fighting. January 1920. The Siberian expanses, gripped by fierce frost, witnessed one of the most dramatic episodes of the Civil War. During the crossing of the Khan River, fate dealt Vladimir Kappel a terrible blow. The ice gave way, and the general fell into the icy water. In 40-degree below zero conditions, this was tantamount to a death sentence. Pulled out by his comrades, he refused immediate medical help. Every minute of delay could cost the lives of hundreds of his subordinates. His soaked clothes quickly turned into an icy shell. Kappel continued moving, not allowing himself even a short rest to warm up and dry his things. The result was catastrophic: severe frostbite on both legs. When, a few days later, the general finally agreed to an examination, the doctors were horrified. Gangrene had set in. The medics insisted on immediate amputation, but in field conditions, without anesthesia, it was an agonizing procedure with dubious chances of survival. Kappel only agreed to a partial operation. His toes were amputated, but the gangrene continued to spread. His condition worsened with each passing hour. Fever, excruciating pain, increasing intoxication, all of this undermined the strength of a once mighty organism. However, even in this state, Kappel refused to hand over command. He understood that his name was the last thing holding the army from final collapse. In a semi-conscious state from pain and fever, the general continued to give orders, plan routes, and make decisions on the reformation of units. When doctors and close comrades began to insist on evacuating the commander to the rear, where he could receive qualified assistance, a categorical refusal followed. "I am a soldier, and I will die a soldier. My duty is to be with the army until the end." These words of Kappel became his last order to himself. He understood that leaving the troops at such a moment would mean betraying those who believed in him and followed him through all trials. He was transported in simple peasant sleds without the slightest comfort. When officers and soldiers approached him during short stops, Kappel found the strength to smile and encourage them. No one heard a single complaint or word of regret from him. Even while dying, he remained an example of fortitude and self-control. In these last days, the full depth of this amazing man's character was revealed. Knowing that death was inevitable, he thought not of himself, but of those he led. Kappel dictated orders for the reorganization of the army, gave advice on upcoming marches, and cared for the wounded and frostbitten. This was the last manifestation of that commanding talent that made him a legend of the White movement. On January 26, 1920, in the small village of Utisovka, near the station of Lialichi, the heart of Vladimir Oskarovich Kappel stopped beating. The general's last words were addressed not to loved ones, not to God, but to those he led through the Siberian snows. This happened in a simple peasant hut, where his adjutants carried him, already losing consciousness. His body temperature had risen to 40 degrees, and gangrene had affected not only his legs, but also his lungs. True to himself until his last breath, he refused to evacuate to the rear, preferring to share the fate of his army. The news of the commander's death spread through the columns of retreating troops with incredible speed. Stern officers, hardened in battle, did not shy away from tears. Ordinary soldiers, exhausted by the marches, fell to their knees before the sled with the general's body. Many could not believe what had happened. It seemed impossible that a man of such strength of spirit could leave them at the most difficult moment. Kappel's body, according to his last will, was not abandoned in an unmarked grave. The soldiers, despite the danger and hardship of the journey, carried him with them to Chita, where a solemn funeral service was held. The coffin, covered with a battle banner, was carried by hand through the entire city. Chita's streets had never seen such a crowd of people. The farewell to Kappel turned into the last review of his troops. The Kappelevtsi marched in a ceremonial parade before the remains of their commander, paying their last respects. The general's death for the White Army was not just the loss of a talented military leader. It acquired symbolic significance. Kappel left undefeated, maintaining loyalty to his principles and his soldiers until the end. His death from illness and not from an enemy bullet was perceived by many as the final blow of fate to an already doomed movement. For the Bolsheviks, the news of the death of one of their most dangerous opponents became an occasion for triumph. Red Army newspapers wrote about the deserved end of the Tsar's minion. However, even among the enemies, there were those who acknowledged the courage and military talent of the White General. In private conversations, Red commanders admitted that with Kappel's departure, there was no one left to oppose them. They saw no one of comparable stature among the White generals. The army, having lost its leader, continued the Ice March. Command was assumed by General Sergei Wojciechowski, one of Kappel's closest associates. He managed to maintain order in the troops and lead a significant part of them to Transbaikalia. But the spirit was broken. Along with Kappel, that inner strength that helped overcome the impossible had departed. After the death of Vladimir Kappel, his troops, orphaned but not broken, continued their journey across snowy Siberia. Command was assumed by General Sergei Wojciechowski, a talented officer and loyal comrade of the deceased commander. He managed to maintain the combat effectiveness of the units and lead a significant portion of them to Transbaikalia, where they joined the forces of Ataman Semenov. The troops, now proudly calling themselves Kappelevtsi, retained a special spirit and traditions established by their legendary commander. Even surrounded by other white formations, they stood out for their discipline, resilience, and a unique brotherhood. Officers and soldiers wore a special badge on their chests, a silver shield with the monogram K, which became a symbol of belonging to the elite of the White Army. In the spring and summer of 1920, the Kappelevtsi took part in the last battles on the territory of Transbaikalia and Primoria. Their desperate resistance to the Red units allowed thousands of refugees to evacuate to China and avoid Bolshevik repression. In October 1922, when Japanese troops left Vladivostok, the last organized units of the Kappelevtsi departed into exile by ship. A long path of emigration began. Most of the Kappelevtsi initially settled in China, in Harbin, Shanghai, Tianjin. Here they established their associations, which became centers for preserving military traditions and the memory of their commander. Annually, on January 26th, the anniversary of Kappel's death, memorial services and veteran meetings were held. In Harbin, where the largest Russian diaspora in China formed, the Museum of General Kappel's memory was established. It housed his personal belongings, photographs, documents, and unit banners. The museum became a place of pilgrimage not only for the general's former comrades, but also for the younger generation of emigrants who had never seen their historical homeland. The Kappelevtsi carefully preserved and passed on to subsequent generations stories about their commander. Gradually, his image acquired the features of a national hero, a symbol of loyalty to duty and the fatherland. Numerous memoirs of participants in the Ice March, published in émigré editions, created a detailed picture of those dramatic events and Kappel's role in them. Military schools established by Russian émigrés in Harbin and Shanghai played a special role in preserving the general's memory. Here, young men, many of whom were born in exile, were educated on examples of the heroism of white warriors, and Kappel's name sounded as a symbol of unyielding will and fidelity to the oath. The image of Vladimir Kappel in Soviet culture underwent a surprising transformation, from demonization to recognition of his military talent and personal courage. In the first decades after the Civil War, official propaganda painted him exclusively in black colors. Kappel appeared as a cruel punisher, a class enemy, merciless towards the common people. Such a one-sided interpretation was necessary to create a clear division between us and them in the emerging Soviet society. The most vivid, demonized image of the white general was embodied in the famous film by the Vasilyev brothers, Chapayev, released in 1934. Although Kappel was not named, viewers unmistakably recognized him in the Black General, leading his troops in a psychological attack. This scene became a classic, and for decades defined the perception not only of Kappel, but also of the entire white movement in the popular consciousness. Socialist realism literature also contributed to the formation of a negative image. In the novels of Furmanov, Ivanov, and Vesely, Kappel's men invariably appeared as enemies of the revolution, doomed to defeat. Artem Vesely's novel, Russia Washed in Blood, particularly stood out, where white officers were depicted as merciless and alien to the people. Even in Soviet-era historical studies, if Kappel was mentioned at all, it was only as one of many White Guard generals, without recognizing his military talents and personal qualities. The first attempts at a more objective view of Kappel's figure appeared only during the quote, "5." In some military historical works, his tactical skill and organizational abilities began to be recognized. However, a real turning point occurred only with the beginning of perestroika and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet ideological system. In the 1990s, the first serious studies dedicated to Kappel appeared. Historians gained access to archival materials, memoirs of participants in the white movement published abroad. This allowed for the creation of a more complete and objective portrait of the general. The release of the film, quote, 6, in 2008, in which Kappel's image was embodied by actor Sergei Bezrukov, caused a special resonance. For the first time, the mass audience saw the white general not as a caricatured villain, but as a living person, courageous, devoted to his ideals, ready for self-sacrifice for the sake of his soldiers. The culmination of the re-evaluation of Kappel's role in national history was the reburial of his remains. In 2007, the general's ashes, originally buried in Harbin, were transported to Moscow and reburied with military honors in the Donskoy Monastery. This ceremony became a symbolic act of reconciliation, a recognition of the merits of all participants in the tragic confrontation, both Reds and Whites, before Russia. Today, the name of Vladimir Kappel is returning to the historical memory of the people. Books are written about him, documentaries are made, streets are named after him. In modern Russian society, he he is increasingly perceived not as an enemy, but as one of the sons of Russia, faithful to his understanding of duty and honor until the end. In April 2007, Moscow witnessed an event symbolizing a crucial stage in understanding our past. An unusual cortege arrived at the Donskoy Cemetery. The remains of General Vladimir Oskarovich Kappel, which had rested abroad for 87 years, returned to his native land. The reburial was accompanied by military honors, which the white general was deprived of at the hour of his death in a distant Siberian village. Officers of the Honor Guard, descendants of both those who fought under red banners and those who followed the whites, paid tribute to a man whose life became a symbol of loyalty to his oath and duty. This moment became a visible embodiment of the idea of national reconciliation, overcoming the tragic schism that had divided compatriots for almost a century. Kappel's figure in modern Russia acquires new resonance. He ceases to be merely a, quote, zero, an enemy of the revolution. Today, he is seen primarily as a patriot, a man of crystalline honesty for whom Russia was above all else. His personal fate, from a brilliant general staff officer to a commander dying in the icy Siberian wilderness, is a path of service that knows no compromises with conscience. In the history of any nation, there are symbols that divide and unite. Kappel, once a symbol of schism, today becomes a point of convergence for different views on the past. His example teaches the main thing. Love for the fatherland can manifest itself in different ways, but it remains the highest value, before which political disagreements fade. The return of Kappel's name to Russian history is not just the restoration of historical justice. It is an acknowledgement that our past is complex and multifaceted, that in the civil confrontation there were no absolutely right or wrong sides. There were people who sincerely believed in their ideals and were ready to give their lives for them. The general's legacy today is not only military victories and defeats. It is a moral lesson of resilience in trials, fidelity to one's word, and readiness to share the fate of those one leads. In a world where cynicism and shrewdness are often presented as virtues, Kappel's example reminds us of eternal values: honor, duty, self-sacrifice.